So this video is going to be on a subject that is a little different from things that I usually discuss, and this is just dealing with something that I actually get questions about quite a bit, and that is about my clothing, why it is that I like to dress up. Because if you followed my videos for a while, you've probably noticed that in the past 2 years or so, I've gotten really interested in classic menswear. Since I get questions about that quite a bit, and questions about my clothes and where I get them and things like that, I'm doing a video on this. So what I'm going to be dealing with is giving you 5 reasons why it is that I like to dress up. So the first reason is that I think aesthetics matters. I mean, as a society in general, we really have no grasp on the true, the good, and the beautiful, which are a reflection of God himself. That's why those are the values that classical culture speaks largely about. And, one of those that we've especially lost is just the notion of beauty, the notion that there is any aesthetic standard at all. And in our culture, we generally privilege even the ugly or that which is purely functional without really an understanding of aesthetic value at all. And one of the ways that comes into play is in our clothing. And so people just kind of dress, like slobs, maybe. Not speaking about anyone specific, but, we don't really put any thought or value into the clothing that we wear, because around us, we just are in a culture of ugliness. And that it has to do with, the architecture that a lot of people are interested in making because it's functional and it's cheap. It has to do with the art and the media that we consume and all sorts of other things around us. So in order to kind of respond to that, one of the ways that we can do that in terms of valuing beauty, which is a reflection of God's own beauty, and because God's beauty is reflected in the world that he has in fact created, one of the ways that we can do that and mirror God is by caring about what we wear. And in dressing up and wearing things that look nice, it is placing a value in aesthetics, not for its own sake or not for the sake that I feel like I look better than somebody else, but because I recognize that that which is beautiful is good. Now, the second reason that I like to dress up, dress well, is that we are embodied creatures. God has created us with bodies, and he has created us to live in this physical world. And that means that which we do with our physical bodies does impact us as persons, and it affects us mentally and emotionally and in other ways as well. We are not just created to be souls trapped in this prison that is our body, but instead we are created to be embodied. We are body and soul together. So with that being the case, the things that we do with our bodies do impact how we feel and how we think and how we interact with others. And when you do dress a certain way, it affects how you feel. It affects your mood. It affects how you look at yourself. It affects how you look at what you're doing. And I've generally found that if I am dressed up or dressed well, that I am more productive in my life. I'm more productive if I'm sitting at home, especially in this time of quarantine when, you're at home, you could be working in your pajamas. You're not as effective working when you're in your pajamas. You are more effective working if you dress up or wear something that signals to your body that you are doing something that is productive, that you are doing work. And so the clothes that we wear really impact how we think and how we feel and how we interact in the world around us. And so if you dress professionally, you start to act professionally. It's just an inevitable outcome of the fact that we are created in this physical world, so that there is this back and forth between the physical and the material. And one of the ways that occurs is how we dress. The third reason I like to dress up is because there's a big problem with what is a throwaway culture that we're living in. And dressing well and wearing nicer clothing or nicer quality clothing is a rejection of what is that just throwaway culture that we live in right now. So we're in a culture where we buy things that are cheap, and we buy things that are cheap because we recognize that you can just get rid of it and buy something else. And I think this goes far beyond just material goods, but we tend to throw away people as well. We use people, we have a friendship or a relationship for a certain time, and now they're no longer useful to us, and we get bored, so we throw them away. We move on to something else. People do this in romantic relationships. They do this in friendships. We even do this with our jobs. People switch jobs so quickly from one to another today because we're generally just in this period of constant transition from one thing or another. This is why a news story that happens one week that everyone's talking about, if you start talking about that news story the next week, everybody's already forgotten because they've moved on to something else. And we have before us, because of the internet, because of just the technology that's before us all the time, things are constantly transitioning and changing. And there needs to be constancy. There is constancy in the world. There's constancy because God himself is constant, who has created this world. But there needs to be constancy in our own lives, constancy in our friendships. That's what we're called to, constancy in our relationships. We're not called to just throw things away. And, we do this with furniture. You look at how homes are built today compared to how they were built 40 years ago. We have just moved into things being cheaply made because we think we can just throw away and get rid of things. But when you buy clothing that, is well made, there is craftsmanship in it, it lasts quite a while. In fact, it lasts many, many decades. And there, I think, is something to that, to say that what you're actually investing in something, you're actually taking care of something. You are not just thinking only in terms of this gives me immediate pleasure and this will be, out of style next season and I'll throw it away. I'll buy something else. And so it gets rid of this kind of just constant consumer idea that we just buy things to throw them away. And instead, it's a recognition that what we have is good and what we have is something that God has blessed us with, and we can actually take care of the things that we've been given. The fourth reason that I like to dress up, specifically wearing classic menswear, is that we have this crisis of masculinity in our culture. And I think there's really no doubt about that. I mean, just male suicide rates, male depression rates are on the rise consistently in recent years. And I think there are a number of factors in that. But as people try to figure out what the problem is, there are many solutions that people have come up with. And there are some who try to argue that there really is no gender distinction at all between male and female. And I think that's a highly problematic thing to argue. But others, and that I've seen specifically in the church, have wanted to emphasize the aggressiveness of males, or the distinction between male and female, in this idea of man as the one who is inherently violent or the one who is inherently aggressive. And I think that's really a mistaken way to kind of recapture what is a classic notion of masculinity. And what I think probably comports most well with what is the biblical ideal of masculinity is this idea of being a gentleman. Now, this notion of being a gentleman is something that really is not prized very much in our society. But a gentleman is not, by the way, just one who dresses well. I mean, I know you think of the idea of gentleman, you often think, someone who enjoys fine things and dresses well and drinks fine wines. But really, being a gentleman is much more about showing respect to other people. It's about treating people well. And it's about having a certain kind of manners and a certain kind of respect for the people that are around you, both other men, women, and in social functions and all sorts of other things. But one of the ways that carries itself out is in the way that men present themselves in the way that they dress. So if we're going to try to recapture what I think is lost masculinity, the way to really deal with that is to recapture what it means to be a gentleman. It's not about being aggressive. It's not about being violent. There's so much more about what it means to be a man. And in fact, a lot of what it is to be a man, especially when you're, raising young boys, and I have 2 young boys, is trying to get them to kind of hold in that aggression that men naturally have. And not to just totally suppress it, but to put it in the right things and aim it the right ways. And the idea of being a gentleman is about the civilizing of men and controlling what are those sometimes impulses that would be less than helpful if you just kind of let men do whatever they want. The fifth reason I like to dress up in classic menswear is because the way you present yourself to the external world really does matter. Now, I think what we've had in our culture today, one of the major problems that we're facing is that we have gotten rid of this notion of the public self and public ritual and how you display yourself when you are in a public venue or before others. And what we've done is conflated that private self with the public self. Now, historically, in the past, there was a certain way that you would act. There were certain things that you would share in the presence of your own home with your family or with your closest friends, and there was a different way that you would conduct yourself in public. Nowadays, that's often seen as being inauthentic, but there really is a reason for those kinds of social barriers, and it's not because when you are out in public that is fake and you have to be your authentic self. No, it's a distinction not between a public self that is fake and an authentic private self, but it's recognizing that there are levels of appropriateness in terms of how you behave and what you share when you are in different social contexts. And this is true in our clothing. If you go out in your pajamas, it's a symbol of what is going on in our culture in terms of taking that private life that you have that really should only be shared, again, with your friends or intimate family, and bringing it out in the public for all the world to see. You see this as, I think, a major problem in the church, where especially in the 90s, this seemed to gain a lot of traction, and I still see it quite a bit today, is that the ultimate value in the church, especially for church leaders, is authenticity. And it's valued to say that there's nothing's off the table. You can share any of your sins with anyone you want, even if you're a pastor. Share your sins in the pulpit so all of the people hear. Well, I think that there are a number of issues with that. Now, first of all, I do want to say, as a Christian, I think it is important to have those individuals that you do confess to, that you are able to share everything with. But that should not be done with a loudspeaker out in public. In fact, I've actually seen that abused to the extent that there are individuals who have been, authentic in sharing their struggles, especially with something like sexuality. And then I've seen a church leader abuse that individual because they've heard that authentic public voice of some struggle that they really shouldn't be sharing publicly. So I think it's important that we have a self that we do portray, not as a different self entirely, but there are certain things that we should share publicly to our society or to the people who are around us. And there are other things that really should be shared just with those you are closest with. This is how society has functioned for the most part. And today we just don't have that at all. And what we have is people sharing their most intimate details on Twitter, and people kind of having this, what is really a faux intimacy, this notion that as long as you get all your dirty laundry just kind of out there and you throw it out there, then people really know you because you've expressed your authentic self. Well, if you do that, you ultimately still feel very lonely and isolated, because that's not the proper context for you to air your dirty laundry. There are proper contexts, and that is real intimate friendship and family relationships. And that is not just the broader world, the internet or whatever. And, honestly, I think you see this largely in just the lack of respect in civil discourse at all. Because, you see this with, and this is not to make a political statement about policies or anything like that, but if you do look at, some of the reasons why people supported Donald Trump was that he was honest. He just said things as they were in the midst of the presidential debates when he first ran in 2016. And while I certainly think that there should be value in being honest, to just say whatever is on your mind is not a virtue. There are times when saying whatever is on your mind can actually be a very bad thing. And in our culture, I think we have wrongly done that. So to wear what is classic menswear, or, if you're a woman, to dress in certain ways that are not just, in your pajamas or whatever it is, you are displaying something to the outside world that you have an air of respectability, that you are portraying yourself publicly in a way that is not overly intimate in an inappropriate sense, which I think is a major problem. So anyway, I know these aren't the things that I usually talk about on my channel, but I do get some questions about it. So I thought it would be fun to just do a totally different kind of video. So if you have any thoughts, comments, questions, please do leave them here and subscribe for other videos that are on theology, not on clothing. Anyway, thanks so much. God bless.